And it is loading up to YouTube, and whenever you want to begin.
Okay, Dr. Jackson's still not on, right? All right, it's 5:34, so I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Mr. Conway, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I will. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The motion. Mr. Conway,
So moved.
any discussion? Is there a second? Sorry. Mr. Wilcox,
Second.
any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Mr. Conway, Mr. Conway,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
Mr. Golton,
I have to apologize. I haven't read them, so I'm going to abstain.
okay. The students are not in, correct, Dr. White?
Correct.
Okay. And Dr. Jackson is not yet in. Okay. And I am a yes, and so the minutes pass. Moving on to the next item, students report, but if they're not in, I'm sorry, public participation. Are we ready?
Dr. Joyner, are you ready as timekeeper?
Yes. How much time tonight?
So it's the same. I'm just reading the agenda. 2 minutes per speaker.
Okay. And just for procedural, when I call time, you can finish your sentence. We haven't cut anybody off. Sometimes people have elected to stop on their own, but you can certainly finish your sentence.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner.
Okay. Our first speaker this evening is Sarah Miller. Ms. Miller, you may begin.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm speaking tonight to follow up on communication sent to district leadership and the board from NHPS advocates regarding COVID safety protocols. We know that staff sometimes feel uncomfortable speaking up, and so we created an anonymous reporting form to share any immediate safety concerns and hopefully see those issues addressed. We appreciate, for example, that cases and quarantines are now reported on the district website, and hope that that table will be expanded to include more detail as other districts have done. We shared via email additional concerns and questions that have come in thus far, which include the following: inadequate cleaning supplies, soap absent from bathrooms, inadequate or inappropriate PPE, including not enough child-sized masks, social distancing and mask wearing not happening consistently, mixing of cohorts and large size cohorts, staff eating lunch in close proximity, specials teachers exposed to more children daily than other staff, inconsistent COVID screening and communication around return to school after children leave with COVID symptoms, inconsistency and unclarity around who quarantines following exposure, especially siblings living with people who are exposed or test positive, the question of who has the right to know about cases in children's schools or classrooms, even if a quarantine is deemed unnecessary, inconsistent levels of deep cleaning on Wednesdays, unclarity about whether different cohorts can share gym equipment, how social distancing can be maintained during fire drills and lockdown drills. It has also been reported that there are no bus monitors, though we all heard in a board meeting that monitors were hired and ready to go. In addition, there's concern about the departure of school nurses who apparently left because they were asked to perform duties outside their scope of work and feel that the quarantine procedures are not sufficient to minimize spread. Maybe these issues have been addressed. We really don't know since we haven't received any response to multiple emails. Yet families and staff have not seen up-to-date district-wide safety protocols beyond what is scattered among 9 documents currently posted to the district website, which are dated from last summer and fall. We see sharing these grassroots concerns as a service to the district.
Our next speaker is Jessica Light.
Mr. White, I'll remind people that they can complete their sentences.
Okay. Ms. Miller, if you want to complete your sentence before Ms. Light begins.
Okay. So let me just find where I was. So I was just saying we see this as a service to the district, and we were concerned that that it was dismissed in an administrators meeting last week, and believe that we all want to see COVID spread minimized and would like to collaborate toward that goal.
Ms. Light, you may begin now.
My name is Jessica Light. I'm a New Haven public school teacher, and I do not want to die. This is my 5th time at a meeting with my employer that I am asking for a unified health and safety plan. If you are unclear what I mean, please reach out when I am allotted more than 2 minutes to speak. Additionally, I am a New Haven public school mom, and I do not want to die. New Haven public schools are currently adding to community spread. We need a unified health and safety plan. I am a New Haven voter, and I do not want to die. If you are unable to keep me safe, I cannot vote for you from the other side. I am scared. We need a unified health and safety plan. I am a New Haven taxpayer, and I do not want to die. We need a unified health and safety plan. Let me be clear. My name is Jessica Light. I'm a New Haven public school teacher, and I do not want to die. I am asking my employer for a unified health and safety plan. Thank you.
Our next speaker is CJ from Black and Brown United in Action.
Good afternoon. I'm CJ, lead organizer for Black and Brown United in Action. I do not want to die. I have a child in school. I do not want her to die. I do not want that teacher to die. I have a question for the Board of Ed. What moves are you making to declare racism a public health crisis? What moves are you making on your own, aside from the Department of Education, to teach slavery in schools and to change the narrative of minorities and people of color to Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian? Again, I do not want to die. We do not want to die. Thank you.
Madam President, at this moment, that concludes those that have raised their hands.
Thank you, Dr. White. Students are still not on, so we'll skip the students' report. Dr. Tracy, Superintendent's Report.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, board and members of the community. On my superintendent's report, I want to acknowledge Miss Liz Gaffney. We call her Elizabeth. She's moving on to greener pastures. She is retiring from New Haven, not retiring, resigning from New Haven Public Schools, and we wish Liz a very good I would say, ensure that she has a good work relationship where she goes. Liz is an awesome worker in the Head Start department, and we will surely miss her. And we have to hope to replace her as soon as possible. It's good that we are not with any Head Start compliance at this time. And she's working to make sure that she transition us with other workers to make sure that the things we have to abide by, we will do so. So I want to thank Liz for the work she has put into the Head Start program. Thank you, Liz, if you're listening. And having said that, I am asking for the board to accept the superintendent's personnel report.
Madam President,
Dr. Joyner?
I have to recuse myself from voting on the personnel report.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Joyner. Mr. Wilcox?
I move we accept and approve the personnel report.
Is there a second? Mr. Conway?
Second.
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yes, this is Dr.
Mr.
Jackson. I have something to say.
Go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
I just want to wish Liz best wishes. I've known her for a very long time, and I feel badly that she's leaving, but I'd like to congratulate her on her next chapter.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Mr. Goldson?
Thank you, Madam President. I noticed on the blue sheet that there was a nurse that was leaving, and I've been getting several emails over the last week or so about schools not having nurses. Can the superintendent report to us? I know I asked this question a couple of weeks ago. Can the superintendent report to us on how many schools do not have nurses?
Dr. Tracy?
We're
Do
on
you
the
have-
blue sheet. We're on the blue sheet as it said the nurses leaving, because the nurses do not work for us. They work for the city of New Haven.
I think it was the second to the last page. Let me pull up the blue sheet here. I know I saw something about a nurse in there, so let's see.
No, I don't see anything on a nurse.
Hold on, I know I saw a nurse. Just give me one more second.
As a point of information, I see it on page 2.
You see it?
Yeah, the second name down on the top of page 2.
Right. Jenny Moncrief, Board of Education nurse, 12 months. Dr. Mayo Center. She is resigning. So apparently, I guess some nurses do work for us.
I have my grandbaby over and battling with him right now. So what page is it, Mr. Goldson?
Page 2.
Page 2.
Page
Sorry.
Resignations.
Page 2, resignation.
Second name down.
Head Start, PA, that we don't hire nurses. And nurses would not have come on our blue sheets.
It says Board of Education nurse, 12 months. That's what's on your blue sheet.
Board of Education, I'm not sure if that is correctly placed there. I'll check with Lisa, because we're not the ones who hire nurses. If this is a city nurse, or I will check on that, Mr. Golson.
All right,
But
well,
as with regard to the question you asked,
yes.
I do not have all the information. I'm waiting on the health department to tell me whether or not those were rumors or not, that someone rumored that we have 15 nurses that have resigned. I wouldn't say rumor. I was asked that by Mr. Chicarella, and I told him I have to wait to hear that information from the health department. I have not heard that from the health department yet. of how many nurses may have resigned their position. So I'm waiting on that information to come to me. I cannot speak what I don't know. So when that information comes to me, I will share it with the board and with the community.
All right, thank you. Madam President,
Thank you, Dr. Tracy.
I asked this question a few meetings ago and still haven't received an answer. So I'd like to make sure that it's in the record, in the minutes of this meeting, that I've asked the question again. And I hope that we have a response by the next board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
You made a
Golden.
question
Mr.
about the
Conway?
nurses?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that information you will have even before the board meeting, as soon as the nursing department gives me an update as to what is happening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have
Thank
a
you, Dr.
question.
Tracy. Hold
I have a
on,
question.
hold on, Dr. Jackson. Mr. Conway?
The other way that you could you could double check that is a lot of time, you know, it's like you might have a Hill Health Center nurse or a Fairhaven nurse, and they may do that. So you might want to just double down by checking with the principals and the because they would even know more than the health department when the nurse comes and when it doesn't come, because a lot of times in schools I worked at, we had nurses and they resigned and they were getting ready to put another nurse there, but they just never got around to it, or a nurse was part-time and they went down to no time. And then, you know, so I think you got to double down with the principals too, because they really would know where the nurses are, Dr. Tracy. Thank you.
All right, and in terms of nurses' resignation, again, I have to get that from the nursing supervisor as to where anyone may have resigned from. That has not come up to our section yet. We've heard of some resignations. We could not say whether they were school-related or were the health department, just health department related, in what sector the resignations were. As soon as I get that, again, I will share that.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy.
My last question is that we did talk about bus monitors before, and I know we don't have a full, you know, array of students coming to school, but we were assured that those bus monitors were hired. We were assured that. Where are we at with the bus monitors?
I know when we had asked that question, staff had answered that we had bus monitors. So I'll bring in Ms. Lisa Mack to clarify.
Okay.
Dr. White, please bring in my executive team on here, please.
Ms. Mack is in.
Good evening, board members.
Good evening.
So with regards to bus monitors, I'm not sure if Mr. Jackson's up here, but I'll give an update to where we are. As I may have mentioned at the last time I provided an update, to date, we have 34 NHPS bus monitors that were called back. Some of the bus monitors have declined to return until the COVID-19 ends, so they refused. Some have declined to not come back. There are approximately 17 that we currently are still working through interviews. I can assure you that this is per Mr. Jackson, Director of Transportation. All pre-K, SPED, and outplacement buses have bus monitor signs. There is an agreement with First Student that if we are not able to provide bus monitors to the required buses that need bus monitors, that the First Student will be assigned pre-K, SPED, and outplacements. They will ensure that there will be bus monitors up there, and while we still in search for additional bus monitors.
Thank you, Ms. Mack.
You're quite welcome.
Any further discussion on approving the blue sheets, the personnel reports?
This is Dr. Jackson. I have a comment.
Go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
I've gotten calls about the nurses, more than one, more than two, that there is a shortage of nurses and that all the schools don't have their nurses due to resignations. I know that they're not Board of Ed employees, but maybe if we could not wait for them to tell us, we should reach out, because we told at the one of our meetings, we told the community, the city, that when we open, there will be a nurse in every building. And with no one's fault, you know, if someone doesn't want to work somewhere, then they're not gonna work. They're gonna leave. And have been several resignations, and I think that we need to be proactive around that and not just wait for them. That's pretty significant for us not to have a nurse in the schools during a pandemic, and we did tell the community that we would have nurses in every school.
Hi,
Dr.
Dr. Jackson. I'm sorry, it's Lisa. May I just make a comment regarding the nurses?
Yes, go ahead.
So with regards to the nurses, as Dr. Tracy did mention, they are City of New Haven employees. And so they're hired by the City of New Haven. So the Board of Ed would not be notified of any resignations or departures until we receive the notification. Now, any nurses that are assigned to the Board of Ed, they're still hired by the city. The one that you're referring to on the blue sheet, that was a Board of Ed employee, but however, she has been out for, she was not working for a long period of time. And I'm saying that to say, because that was a special funds grant funded position. And so that's the reason why it is appearing on the blue sheet. She has finally, she's resigned. And so that is why Dr. Tracy was unfamiliar with this particular one, because the nurses are a City of New Haven employees and they're hired through the city. So to Dr. Jackson's point, I understand we are collaborating, but we wouldn't have any knowledge of their resignation until we receive notification.
Right. No, I understand that, Madam President. May I just add one more thing? But if we don't have nurses in the schools, whether they work for, whether they work for the Wizard of Oz, we would know. If there's no nurse on site, I think that should be kind of like something that the building leaders should be alerted to. Hey, central office, whoever they have to answer to, we don't have a nurse here. Why? And then that should trigger us, the Board of Ed, to reach out to the city and say, hey, you guys are supposed to be putting nurses in the buildings. We don't have any. What's going on? And then I think that would, bring us some kind of clarity a lot sooner than waiting for them to tell us who resigned. Because we shouldn't be having any of the kids in the buildings without nurses, because the administrators are not medical. So they're not going to be able to assess anything.
And I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, Dr. Jackson. If there is a nurse so sometimes the administrators don't know whether the nurse has resigned or the nurse just doesn't show up. So if a nurse indicates to an administrator, if they do that they have resigned their jobs, those administrators will now tell their principal supervisors, and it will be surfaced to us at central office that a nurse has resigned. Now, we don't know if the nurses have indicated wherever they are or wherever they're from or working that they have resigned. And that's why I'm saying that if there are resignations, I did hear through the grapevine, and I reached out to the Director Bond, and she will be getting back to me on that. So that's why I'm saying I'm not sure if there are any resignations in the school, because that has not been surfaced, at least to my level.
No, but my point is, it doesn't matter if they resigned or not. If there's no nurse in the building, I think that, I don't know how that, is there a way, does that alert? Like, if there's no nurse, is that a red flag to say, hey, why do we not have a nurse? Like, I don't care if they resigned, didn't show up. If there's no nurse in our building, what is the signal? What is the red flag during this pandemic time, which is even more critical to have a nurse in the school, to have us inquire of why we don't have a nurse? That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if they resigned or not either. I know what I'm hearing, but I don't know. What is the impetus for us to ask, where's the nurse? We were supposed to have a nurse in every building. So that's my point.
Right. So red flag would be to the principal supervisors, whoever those supervisors are, assistant superintendents or the supervisors of those principals. And then we would have learned of it in our team. And then we would have made inquiry. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. Mayor Elicker, and then Dr. Joyner.
Thanks. There's been a challenge statewide and beyond about the number of nurses, and so we have some nurses that have resigned recently. Folks will also remember that there's a temp company that we have that brings in nurses as well to cover when nurses are out. I'll confirm with Director Bond, and we'll get you more specifics about if it's a significant issue or not. And we'll get that information to you shortly.
Thank you, Mayor Eliger. Dr. Joyner? Mr.
Could we
Goldstein?
just simply ask that, one, that we have a protocol, a relationship between our Human Resource Department and the city to let us know when there are pending resignations. Could we also ask principals to inform their supervisors as soon as possible when they know of a possible resignation? And could we ask board members to call the president or the superintendent as soon as they hear rumors so that those rumors can be either confirmed or denied? If we can do that, then at least we'll have the intelligence we need to determine what the coverage is in the schools.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Mr. Goldstein?
Thank you, Madam President. I understand the problem that there may be a miscommunication between the city and the school system, and apparently it sounds like no one's really assigned to manage that process. But I'm hearing something different. I'm getting texts and emails from teachers who are saying there has never been a nurse in our building since school reopened, specifically Lincoln Bassett. And they said that they sent requests to the administration several times, wanting to know what was going on and never got a response. So this is not an issue where someone resigned. This is an issue where there was, as far as I could tell from the emails I've received, no one was ever even assigned to that school. So we gotta improve this communication system because people just don't know what's going on when you don't answer them. So again, I hope before the next board meeting, we get that report when our constituents ask us, we can answer them. Also, Madam President, I have one other question. I've also been getting a lot of calls about an issue that for me sounds a little disturbing. Apparently, a staff member had a car accident with a student in the car during work hours. And I've heard some other stuff. I don't want to bring it up until, the police report is done or whatever. But what's going on with that? I mean, is that an issue that we need to be concerned about?
Dr. Tracy, could you respond to that?
Yeah, I will respond. I'm wondering why that's an issue for us to be concerned about. If you do not have a police report to go along with whatever, why should that be an issue to be concerned about?
Are you asking me? Because I will respond if you want me to.
Yeah, just rhetorically.
Okay, well, the issue is we've already dealt with a bunch of other lawsuits in this system when we haven't dealt with things quickly, like that lady in the wheelchair who won a $500,000 settlement because we didn't build her a ramp. I mean, we could have built a $40,000 ramp and saved ourselves $500,000. We didn't do it. So I want to make sure that this is not being swept under the rug or forgotten or pushed to the back, and that we're dealing with it the way any human resources department would deal with an employee on work time, having a minor in the car and having a major accident. That's why it's an issue for me, Madam Superintendent, because it's concerning to me that I haven't heard of any. I wouldn't even be bringing it up. I didn't know about it until I started getting all the phone calls about it. So I'm just asking you, is it being dealt with? I like that on the record. It is being dealt with, and then we can move on.
Mr. Goldson, I guess you're privy to a lot of information, so why don't you share with us the information that you have? You're privy to a lot of information, it seems.
I am not. I am privy to parts of stories. I want to get all the information. That's why I'm not that's why I'm not saying what I know totally, because I don't have all the information. You're the employer. We learned at our last board meeting that we as board members are not the employees of your subordinates. You are. We only employ you. We're only your boss. So I don't have all the information. I'm just asking you a very simple question. Are you aware of this, and is it being dealt with? That's all I'm asking, Madam President, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Golson. Mr. Wilcox?
My only comment was going to be just in relation to the school nurses that when the information is provided to us, it would be convenient if it was listed maybe by school and have that information about whether it's being covered by temp or by a regular permanent staff member. But I could imagine just getting a list, and it would be helpful if that list was by school so we knew where the gaps were, if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox.
Madam President,
Dr. Jackson?
I just have one question for Dr. Tracy, just with the nurses. Which it seems like we might not have coverage in some schools until we get temps, the process or how we support those schools during the time before they have a medical person in the building. So for instance, like how are we support, oh, okay, I'm back. How are we I'm sorry, hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes, it went away a little bit.
How are we supporting those nurses nurses, how are we supporting the schools when they don't have a nurse in the building? And you don't have to answer that now. I just want to make sure that we have that plan in place. If it might be an issue for short periods of time due to the nursing and finding new nurses, I just want to make sure we have something for the schools to follow, because not everyone is comfortable during this time around fevers and whatever, that may happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Mr. Conaway?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing for bus monitors. And I know, they're just like the same thing, just like nurses. Not as important, but important for those individuals. So I just want to make sure that we stay on top of that with first student or HR or whatever, because bus monitors are important as well. They set the tone in the morning, and they could see things that we just don't see. So I think that's important too. Just like the nurses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. Okay, seeing no further discussion, we need to vote on the approval of the personnel reports. Mayor Elicker?
Yes.
Dr. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Conway?
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Students are still not here. Dr. Joyner, you're abstaining?
Recusing.
Recusing, okay. Thank you. And I am a yes. And so the personnel report passes. Please continue,
Okay.
Dr. Tracy.
Thank you so much. So we have been trying some things to ensure that we have connection to folks in the school system, the learning community, and other community members. And we're launching what is called Reconnect Campaign. And it's spearheaded by Ms. Tiffany Jackson. So she will say more about that. Ms. Tiffany Jackson.
Good evening, everyone. We're so excited that we actually have started a campaign around the concept of us all being connected, both within New Haven Public Schools and our community partners. We are, as a part of our campaign, the launching of our campaign, you will see that within the next couple of days, we have a whole long video that includes community members, it includes folks from New Haven Public Schools, and really letting people know that they're not alone, that we're all connected, that in spite of the pandemic, we're all working together, and really just inspiration and hope, messages of inspiration and hope. One of the very first things that we are going to be doing, in addition to this, the video montage, we have on February 24th, there's materials in your packet, a day of hope and healing. A lot of this really is looking at us gathering information, surveys from students, from our parents, from our staff, really around this notion of how can we all stay connected and what is it that we need enough for people to be able to feel valued? What is it that you need enough to be able to continue moving forward? So holding safe spaces for our staff, holding on this particular day, fun activities, information relative to COVID, and a host of other activities. And the other thing that we will be doing as well, this is not just a campaign that is a singular activity, but something that we want to endure over a period of time. Again, continuing to have spaces for hope and healing for our students and our families and our staff members. So more to come on social media and the websites in your packets. We hope that you can join us on February 24th for this day of hope and healing. There's a lot of information to come. So thank you for your time and your consideration. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Any questions around what Ms. Jackson just presented? If not, I'll move on into the other aspect. In your packet, I also tried to share some positive accomplishments since August 2020 to present. And today I somehow, youth, family, community engagement was not attached. I sent it off to all board members today. There are a number of things that's happening in New Haven public schools, not just COVID related, but a lot of other things are happening in New Haven public schools to show that we are focused on so many different facets of the work, and that even though we know we have challenges and we'll continue to have challenges, whatever they are, that we continue to make sure that other aspects of the work is also being done. And we had shared ahead of time the strategic school plan with the board, and we're adhering to that aspect of the strategic school plan. And so much of the report is looking at TACO, which is talent, academics, climate and culture, and organization. So we have shared some things with you. In addition, we have put in our strategic school plan an area that is called Priority Area 5.1 around equitable resourcing. And so you will notice that the upcoming budget conversation will be framed around equitable resourcing, where we want to create and implement a transparent budget process that is equitable and site-based to support the instructional core and premised on a balanced budget. So at this time, let me bring in Mr. Phil Penn, who will lead us through the budget. There's a table of contents with background, key trends, the proposed 2021-22 budget, how each of the school is funded, and additional information, and then we'll take question and answers. Mr. Penn.
Madam President, may I share the screen?
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Good, thank you. All right. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about our outlook for the general fund budget for the 21-22 year. As Dr. Tracy has already mentioned, we broke up the pages into a couple of big buckets, ending with Q&A that we'll be happy to take at the end. As Doc mentioned, Priority Area 5.1 talks about equitable resourcing and creating and implementing a transparent budget that's equitable and site-based. And one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of equitable within the F&O meetings is that equitable doesn't necessarily mean equal. So one of the things we've started to look at in a lot of depth is how to allocate resources in a manner that shows that equity between magnet and neighborhood schools, and schools that have a lot of different grant funding programs and those that do not. And consistent with what we did last year, we want to present a budget that really does reflect the true cost of running the New Haven public schools on an annual basis. As many of you know, we're obviously a very diverse school district with fairly high needs. If you look in the top left corner here where I've indicated English learners at about 17.5% of our school population, and special education at 16.7%, both of those are up compared to where they were a year ago. So the needs continue to grow as we go forward. How are we funded? And I'm going to use a number that you may not be familiar with. This is how our 2019-20 cost broke down across the district, $358.8 million. And like I said, some of you may not be familiar with that. This includes all the expenses that aren't in our budget, but that the city pays on our behalf. And the overwhelming majority of that would be things like medical benefits for our general fund staff, payroll taxes, some staff that we have in terms of those nurses we were just discussing, the crossing guards, things of that nature. But when you break it down, roughly 200 million of the funding for the schools comes from state grants. There's about 50 million that comes from the federal government. There's a very, very tiny piece that comes from private grants. And then local taxes at 108 million make up about a third of the budget overall. But that's how the 359 million comes together on an annual basis. And that's really what the total cost is to run the district annually. How does our spending compare to what they call the big three? The big three being Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport, the three largest in terms of student populations in the state. New Haven comes in at just over $18,000 per student, which is almost exactly equivalent to the state median. And what I found kind of interesting here when looking at the data for 2019-20 is that Hartford spends about $2,000 more per student than we do, and Bridgeport spends about $3,000 less. So there's a wide array of funding differences in terms of a per pupil basis, even within the three largest urban districts within the state. Historical enrollment. If you look at what they call the official October 1st number that's reported to the State Department of Education every year, on October 1st, 2020, that number for New Haven Public Schools was just a hair over 20,000. And what you'll notice here is there's a drop of about 4,000 students over the past 4 years. So that has important implications, both in terms of state aid going forward and on our need for facilities. The question is that the beginning of a long-term trend, or is something accelerated in the past couple of years here that we're yet to identify in our pattern? But there is a pretty sharp drop that takes us back to just about the 2010 level in terms of where our student enrollment is. So rolling back almost a full decade. So you probably have seen me present this before in various fashions. This is the breakdown of the Education Cost Sharing Grant and the Alliance Grant for our school district for the past 10 years or so. So by statute, since New Haven is an Alliance district, any future changes in our ECS allocation have to be made through the Alliance Grant. It's not going to change the base ECS number. You've probably heard me talk before about why that's important, is that we are limited in some respects in terms of what we can spend within the Alliance Grant. And typically it's on new items as opposed to existing items. And it's concentrated in talent, academics, culture and climate, and operations. But it is more restricted than the general ECS fund is. But you'll see in this most recent year, for 2021, the year in which we're operating, our total funding between ECS and Alliance was just over $160 million. How does our grant funding compare over the last 2 years? Now, on the surface, if you were to look at this slide, you say, oh, wow, that was great. We were $6 million higher in 1920 than we were in 1819. And that is true on an absolute basis. But if you take note of what's at the bottom, 8.5 million of that in 1920 came out of the CARES Act. Some people call it SR1. I personally like to call it the CARES Act, which is, of course, a one-time grant. You know, very important for the way that we reopened schools, and we got into a one-to-one technology initiative with the students. But if you were to back out that 8.5 million, the grant total would have dropped to 81.6, and thus we would have been down actually about 3 million from the year prior. You probably have heard me say that, you know, long-term, the grant trends haven't been very favorable to us, which is why we've now brought on a grant writer into the district. But it further indicates how there's pressure on the general fund budget as we go forward. So let's get into the meat of the budget. What's the ask? If you were to roll forward for 21-22, what we're requesting is $198 million compared to 189.2 that was our approved budget for this year. That's a difference of 8.8 million, or an increase of 4.65%. So that reflects what we would call a status quo budget. I've used the phrase turn the light on budget before. What that means for us is that we are saying it doesn't add additional resources to the district. It doesn't put more positions on that aren't in the budget right now. But we have included in the projection the closure of West Rock and the Quinnipiac schools and the impact from those. And we'll talk about that in a few slides. This is how the overall budget breaks down. I mean, not surprisingly, we are a very much a salary and benefit driven organization. Out of the total $198 million proposed budget, 124 million of that is in salaries, overtime benefits, the cost of substitutes, people, in other words. If you add in tuition for out-of-district students, you'll see that below at about 20.4 million, and transportation at 23, those three items, personnel, tuition, and transportation, make up about 75% of the general fund budget. If you throw utilities on top of that, now you're at almost 80%. So there really isn't a whole lot of discretionary items that exist once you get past those few items. In fact, it's all in essentially the other contractual services and some of the instructional supplies. But you'll see the relative changes here. The budget increase that we're projecting for next year is driven almost exclusively off salaries and benefits, and the non-salary piece actually comes down a little bit compared to where we are this year. As I mentioned, one of the notable cost drivers I just mentioned a few seconds ago, 75% of that general fund cost is in personnel, the out-of-district tuition, the transportation. Essentially, all of our full-time staff are part of the collective bargaining agreements. So looking at the three largest collective bargaining units, what's the impact for next year? Teachers will have step movement in their 21-22 contract with a $2,000 increase to the top step. Administrators have step movement and a 2.25% general wage increase. And paraprofessionals have step movement and a 2.40% increase. So out of a total of about 2,800 full-time staff, those three bargaining units account for about 2,400 people. So they make up the overwhelming majority of our full-time staff. For the estimates for the remaining full-time staff, we estimated anywhere between 2 and 2.5% for the remaining bargaining units and those folks that are not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. As you might expect, we did include also any kind of price escalation that's spelled out in our long-term agreements or contracts, things like transportation or building maintenance contracts, things of that nature. So this is kind of how it breaks down pictorially. So you'll see the full-time personnel in the blue color makes up the overwhelming majority, part-time personnel, and then the rest of the costs really only account for about 25%, 30% of what's out there. And as I said, if you back out transportation and you back out instruction, which includes that that out-of-district tuition, there's just not a whole lot of the pie that's left to go around. So we did this last year and it received a favorable reaction from the board. So we're going to do it again this year. These are the things that collectively as a management team we're proposing that go into the budget for next year. And I guess I would point out, as it says in the headline at the top, that this is not included in that $8.9 million ask. This is additionally above and beyond that. And if you look at the far right-hand column of this page, one of the things that we're noting is this cost potentially grant eligible or not? I'll kind of go through, I won't go through every item on this page. We do have expertise on the call with us tonight that can get into the detail. But as of, for instance, the equity adjustment for English learners and for the grant fund, the general fund only schools, we're going to talk a little bit about that equity piece of $350,000 in a couple of slides. We've identified that there's a need for 11 new FTEs for English language support going into next year. We want to put in $700,000 or so for an accelerated Set for Success program to help students in the schools where they're struggling the most. You'll see that we've put in $1.8 million for a 5-year agreement for new K-5 math texts. You may recall that we had this item on the list last year. We were able to defer it out one more year. But we think there's not really an opportunity to continue to defer going forward. One of the items that's not potentially grant covered, and we'll talk about this, is professional development for our central office staff of $20,000. There are a number of folks that work in central office that, because they're not quote unquote instructional personnel, can't participate in grant funding streams for professional development. So if we, for instance, wanted to have somebody go out and be part of a law webinar or on human resource issues or major emerging areas in labor relations, within my own staff, things that are pending right now with the Government Accounting Standards Board that we should be aware of going forward, or for how you account for federal grants, we don't really have a mechanism for paying for that at this point. You'll see on here, we've got the initial implementation of Black and Latinx studies for next year. That is a new state requirement that will begin in the next school year. And then some additional modules for mystery science, grade 9 world history. As I said, I think the overwhelming majority of these are potentially grant fundable. But you'll see I make the point a little bit later on that we don't know what the grants look like yet. So we're not sure for sure. We can't be 100% for sure if these are going to get covered. I want to take a couple of minutes to kind of explain how we divide up resources at a site level to each of these schools. So I'll ask you to kind of bear with me as we go through this exhibit. We make available to the schools a total of $1.75 million in discretionary spending by the principal that you'll see, and I think it's the 5th or 6th column over, and an additional $500,000 for part-time staff. So a total of $2.25 million that's paid for out of the general fund budget. How do we allocate that? Well, the way we do it is we take all of the students that are residents and we divide that $1.75 million by the total number of resident students, and it comes up to just about $100 per student. It's $100.56, which you see on the second row. Mm. If you then take the $348, for instance, 348 resident students at Barnard, and you multiply it by the $100.56, you come up with $34,996. Similarly, if you're to take the $500,000 and divide it the same way, you wind up with $28.73 per student. In the case of Barnard, you wind up with $9,999, or a total funding of the $44,000 and change that's shown in that column. And that continues on down the page. Now, I did not include every school on here, obviously. This is meant to be just an illustration. If we had included all the schools, it'd be a level of detail you wouldn't be able to read really what was on the slide. But this is the methodology that we use across all the different schools. And it's how we give some discretion to the principals for their site-based budgets. One of the other things that we look at pretty closely is how are these schools funded? And you'll see on the very left side of this slide, how are they funded in terms of grants? There's the Federal Merit Grant, there's the SIG Grant, there's the Title I SIG Grant, Commissioners Network Grant, and the Title I Grant. Those are the major funding streams that all the different schools have. We also then look at what are the absolute number of ELs within those schools, and what is that as a percentage of that school. And anything over 15% becomes a state mandated, we have to provide resources within that school. Lastly, we looked at what's the type of the school that's involved. Is it a neighborhood school, or is it an interdistrict magnet school? And you'll see that broken out here as well. So what we're proposing is taking $350,000, and the $350,000 frankly does not have any magic to that number. It was a pick. We can make it $400,000 and apply the formula the same way. We can reduce it to $200,000 and apply the formula the same way. There really was no magic around that 350, but it kind of felt like a good place to start. So what we're saying is that if we're going to break up that $350,000 into two pieces, $250,000 for more EL supports, where we have schools that there's concentrated numbers of EL students, and $100,000 to go to the neighborhood schools that do not have anything other than the general fund to support that school. So how does that break down? So if you take a look, for instance, at the number of ELs, we took the total number, calculated that out into a per student basis for all the schools that had over 15%. So in the case of Barnard, again, we would take 89 EL students times the $97.85 per student and wind up with $8,708 being allocated to Barnard as additional resources, recognizing the high concentration of EL students within that school. Similarly, if you were going down to Nathan Hale, you'll see that that school does not have any other grant funding streams and is a neighborhood school. And so they're entirely dependent on the general fund. So what we're suggesting is we take $70.97 per student, and give them additional resources of about $38,000 to run the school. So it's kind of an inside look at how we allocate at a site-based, but recognizing that, again, equitable doesn't necessarily mean equal. So what we're suggesting in this is a way that we could potentially shift around funds in a way that would benefit the students that have the most need, as measured in the district right now. As I mentioned earlier, we've reflected in the 21-22 estimate the closure of West Rock and the Quinnipiac schools. The estimated value of that savings is about a little over $1 million. About $440,000 of that is from the administrator salaries that are associated with those buildings. And we do know of retirements and other transitions that are taking place. So we're not fearful of layoffs being a factor within this. But then we also know that there's about $600,000 in operating costs, and within that, at about $600,000, and that's how you get to the total, and that's just over $1 million. That's already reflected in the estimate that we showed at the beginning of the presentation. What we don't know, grant funding, and especially with respect to our Alliance grant. As I mentioned earlier, by statute, all future increases in ECS have to come through Alliance. As you know, we're at the front end of the state's biennial budget process, and we may not really have a clear picture of what the funding is going to look like for a couple more months as the governor works with the legislature on what the increase will be. We'll at least have in a couple of days what the proposed increase is, hopefully, in the governor's budget for New Haven. But it may not be until sometime in April or May until they settle the budget and we know what the final numbers are going to look like. So as you know, we go through a fairly exhaustive process with building this budget out. We have a number of items that are already complete. You'll see a couple of items on here that are pending at this point. Those mostly relate to us sending out the site-based budget to the principals. We've held off on that for a bit, knowing that we're looking to add a new dimension on that into the ELs and to the neighborhood schools, but that's kind of been pending the board's acceptance of that concept. We didn't want to send it out and then have to yank it back if the board wasn't on board with that concept at this point. We're going to have a community forum on the budget on the week of February. Doc, help me out. What day did we pick? Was the 17th?
Yes, the 17th.
Thank you, Dr. White. Appreciate that. And then you'll see the continuation on the rest of the process here through the end of February, at which point the budget will be due to the mayor. We know we'll have a hearing with the Board of Alders sometime in April. And then we'll have to adopt the budget based on what the Alders decide will be the final number sometime in May or early June. But that's kind of a very similar process to what we followed. And we'll see that we've got two different community forums on the budget that we're going to take just to make sure people have an opportunity to share their feedback on what we're proposing as well. So just one final thought, and there's been a lot of conversation around this. As you know, we recently were awarded what's called the SR2 Grant for $37.8 million. We think that's going to be extremely helpful as we build out improvements for our students over the next 2.5 years, because the grant goes out to September of 2023. In terms of additional academic resources, additional social emotional resources, making sure that we have adequate PPE and other things in the building going forward. However, and this is a big however, SR2 unfortunately is very similar to Title I grant, and it's got the same restrictions on not supplanting expenses that already exist in our general fund. Therefore, if we do wind up with a deficit going into next year, we can't rely on SR2 to close that deficit at all. So at that point, let me take questions, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Penn. Any questions? Mr. Golson?
Thank you, Madam President. I need some time to absorb this, but I got to tell you, I don't know if that equity, and I'm talking to the superintendent now. I'm addressing my questions and comments to the superintendent. She can get whoever she wants to answer from the staff, but that's how I'm going to do this. I'm not so I don't see the equitability. Okay, I don't see how equal.
See how it's equitable.
I can't get that word out for some reason. I cannot see how that formula makes it all equal. I see some big numbers, some places, some little numbers, the other places. Not quite sure what the definition of most needs is. We've been addressing this issue for 5 years now, and everybody in this administration, every year is a new ideal of what the formula is. And I'm not quite sure what most needs is defined as. At one time, they had 10 different items in there and with percentages each, and so I'm a little confused about that. I'm also a little disappointed about the wish list that was put there. You know, we talked a lot last year about non-union and part-time employees getting some raises. They haven't gotten raises in 4 or 5 years. We have people that are making $12 an hour. We put a committee, you know, we talked about it. We put a committee together. It's still not on this wish list. And if we follow the formula that is in this presentation, it says 2% for all other employees, which I assume are those employees. For a $12 an hour, 19-hour employee, that's $4.56 a week before taxes. So you know, it doesn't seem to be. It doesn't. At the same time, we have a wish list that's adding several $60+ $1,000 positions, one $165,000. So I don't see how this is fair to anyone except high-paid administrators, quite frankly. I hope nobody gets insulted by that, but that's just the way I see it. I'm a little concerned about this SR2 grant because I don't see anything in this presentation about how the decisions are going to be made, where the priorities will be with that money. I don't see any community parent input to that process. I know for a fact that my grandson is a little behind and could use a tutor. I know there's probably a lot of other students out there that could use that. I don't see that in everything that we've been saying lately. So I'm concerned about that, and I'm hoping that we'll get there. Now I got a couple of questions, Superintendent. It looks like we are paying 96.5% of the transportation contract. And I'm wondering how that number is so high based on the fact that they didn't transport kids for 4 or 5, however many months it was, how we still are paying them 96.5% of their original contract. And on top of that, the new budget proposed is actually 2% over the original budget. And again, I need some additional information. I know that we have lowered enrollment. We have 2 schools that are closed. So I'm wondering how, and we paid them $22 million in the pandemic year when they only transported maybe 3-4 months, whatever it is. That's the projection. I don't understand why we can't save any money on this transportation budget. We're actually increasing it by 2%, not over what we actually spent, but over what we wanted to spend 2 years ago. So it's probably about 4% over what we actually spent. So I have a question about the transportation and why we're at that number. I'd like to know what our enrollment has dropped by. We saw what the savings were from the schools closing, but I don't know. I don't know if it had what the transportation cost savings were in that. So concerned about the non-union part-timers and how we haven't wrapped that into our budget. I'm concerned about this new COVID grant and how that's going to be spent, what the priorities are going to be on that, and how parent and community input is taken on that. Real parent and community input, not a 1 meeting, 2-minute limitation process, but setting up some sort of committee where they are part of the process. I would like to see that. Of course, I'm just one guy. So that's where I am at this point. I do have one other question, Madam Superintendent. So I had 2 questions. I had one about the transportation. Well, I had more than 2 questions. But my other question is regarding this proposed budget. In the column where it says on page 11, it says January full year expenditure forecast $188,474,037. But in the budget presentation that we were given last month, the January presentation on page on page 3, it said that number, the full year expenditure forecast was $188,398,052. That's a $76,000 difference between what we were told as the January forecast last month and what we were told in this document is the January forecast. So where's that $76,000 coming from all of a sudden? Why is there a difference? Thank you, Madam President.
So if I may, Mr. Goldston, you've said a mouthful, you've said a lot. Let me see if I follow what you're saying. Let me first start with the SR2 grant.
Yes.
We have a committee. We have a tentative communication plan that we're relooking at to send to the board. We've been working on that. We've met with the State Department. There are specific priorities for this grant of how, in the areas in which we can spend this money. So we have convened so far a planning committee. We're going to have focus groups. We're going to meet with community members. We're meeting with all stakeholders, including the board. Everyone is involved in this aspect to get ideas from about how we're spending as soon as we share the priority areas from the state. Ms. Keisha Hannans is spearheading that with a team of people. We have parents, we have community members on the team. So those things are in the works. We just launched that planning team today and have plans to reach out to other sectors of the community. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that just came to us and we started working, even without having, so the board will also have an opportunity to chime in on those areas too. So I will send to the board so you can have a clear understanding of what the stipulations are under this grant. So that is coming along with our communication plan.
Okay.
How we are laying this out in terms of timeline.
Okay.
In regards to the high-paying administrators, please be reminded that my position has not been filled. So where is that? Where are all those things that I used to do as an assistant superintendent? Guess what? I have burdened, I've thrown that onto my team members who also have work and other work to do. I have increased their number of schools. I have branched out to people in the SA union, working closely with, what's her name? My SA union, Sequala Coleman. Please allow me, and this is the second year we're using these people. We are not supposed to use people like that. They're labor law violations here. And I have to make sure that there's someone who replaces the position I had before I became interim superintendent and assistant and superintendent. So that's where that is. We have to fill that position. Remember, there were 5 directors of instruction. You have been on the board, know that. That has boiled down to 3 assistant superintendents for instructional leadership. we only have 2. So I just wanted to point that out. That's why that position, we're now putting it on there so that we can get someone in place to make sure that the organization is run efficiently and smoothly.
But that was only part of the issue. The
Yeah, no, I just
actual
addressed
question,
that one.
the actual question was about the part-timers and what are we going to do to deal with that?
So from my understanding, there's an equity group working right now. And so whatever comes out of that equity group to deal with that part-time piece will come out of that equity team. There's an equity team that is in works right now, correct?
Will that be ready for this budget? Will it be able to be plugged into this budget? Whatever comes out of that equity team?
I am not sure, Mr. Golson, but we'll look into that.
Okay.
The other part was where was it?
Transportation.
The transportation piece. Mr. Penn, would you like to address the transportation piece?
Mr. Penn?
Mr. Penn?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's looking at something. Okay.
I
Okay.
am. So forecast we have of transportation for this year, 21, almost 22 million, down from almost 23 last year, which probably reflects that we've got some of the buses running now, and the fact that we're going to lose part of the state reimbursement for the managed school transportation grant because we had a significant number of days where the managed schools, our inter-district managed schools, were not running. But I can certainly go back and re-verify those numbers on the outlook. Next year assumes that we have a 3% increase in the base contract, but that we fully get back the inter-district magnet grant, which would get us back down to the 23.2 million that we have shown for the initial budget projection. But I could certainly, like I said, go back and take a look at that outlook figure and make sure that we've got it correct.
Dr. Tracy, the original question was, how did we end up paying this bus company 96% of their contract when they haven't been, when they just started fully transporting, not even fully transporting folks. I mean, we're still only transporting 4,000 kids to school. So how are they getting 96% of their budget? I just don't understand that.
That's what we'll get back to you with that answer, Mr. Golson.
Okay.
Right now, I don't think we can pluck it out of the brain box right now, but we'll get back to you with that answer, or with the entire board. We'll get that back to the entire board.
All right. And the other piece was the difference in math from last month's proposal to us and this month's proposal to us. Why is there a difference of $75,000 there, $76,000? On page 3 of last month's proposal, presentation, there was like I said, it was $75,000 difference from the presentation now. And I'm trying to figure out what I'm missing here. The number was $188,398,052. This month is $188,474,037. It's supposed to be the same number because it's from the same document. So I'm wondering why there's a difference. I mean, this all comes from a spreadsheet, so I don't know how there would be a $75,000 difference if you add up all the numbers. I guess if you don't have the answer tonight, you could get that to me.
He'll get back to you with those answers because that's a good question. We'll get back to you with those answers.
All right, one more question, and I'll put the other questions in writing to you over the week, is how has the enrollment dropped? What was the enrollment last year? What is the enrollment this year? I think we dropped by what, like 2,000? Am I off on that?
No, that's not, no.
Do you know the answer to it, or should I wait?
We've not dropped by because we're showing right now that we're 20,000 in enrollment. That's
That's
where
not
we
what-
are right now.
That's not what
On the sheet you may have looked at, it says 19,000 something because we have not counted Montessori school in there, City Montessori.
Okay. They don't have 1,000 kids.
No, they don't.
All right,
But
so
I
you'll
don't- we
you'll
have
let us
not
know.
dropped yes, we'll get
Okay.
enrollment back to you. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner, and Mr. Conaway, then Dr. Jackson.
I'll try to be brief, but I think it's really important that we look at the context that we're working in. And before I do that, I'd like to compliment Mr. Penn on a very highly conceptualized reporting system. I think we can agree that we haven't been getting that in times past. I'd also like to commend the administrators for working so hard, taking on additional duties, our personnel department, our human resource department, our assistant superintendents. And I'd also like to offer my support to Mr. White. He knows, Dr. White, rather. He knows what that's all about. And I'm sure other board members know it as well. We are really trying to create an equitable school system when our external funding streams are inequitable. And that's the herd of elephants in the room. And those of us who've been on the board for a while have been talking about that. I don't know what the answer is, because quite frankly, the state is in a tough situation. But basically, we have a limited amount of money in a high needs district where everybody is high needs, particularly some of our employees that are at the lower levels in terms of salary, as has been indicated. But as I say that, we also have a number of funding streams that are earmarked. So the general public has to understand that we just don't have X amount of money coming into the district to do what we want to with. Mr. Penn has pointed out very well that Title I and the new money that we're getting is targeted, and we have to spend it on what we have to spend it on. I'm hoping that the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, will give us some breathing room, but we have to deal with what we have. And saying all of that, we have a mandate to allocate those resources in the best interest of children. That's our sole purpose for coming to these meetings, to make sure that any resources that we have, any monies that we spend, that we can show a direct connection between those funds and what happens to kids and families. In order to do that, we have to rely on the professional expertise of our staff to make these determinations. The people who are closest to it, who do it every day. And we also have to hold everybody to high ethical standards in terms of spending public money. And we have to ask tough yet respectful questions. I mean, that's our job as board members. And in saying that, we will never please everyone, because quite frankly, most human beings operate out of their own selfish interests. And as a board, we have to try to lead the community in a way that helps them understand that every child counts, every family counts, and that we have to do what we can to get the best resources. And what equity is all about is give to each according to their needs. And we have to figure that out. You know, if we're not doing it quite like we should right now, we ought to try to come together as a board and as a community to figure out who the most needy children are, who the most needy families are, and how we can help them, and how we can use resources beyond ourselves to help them. And that's why I was so pleased with having seen Tiffany Jackson in a long time. It was a great thing to see her again, because she certainly is one of those, in my opinion, highly competent and compassionate and intellectual administrators. So I just would ask all of us to think about the context that we're in, to try to focus our attention on gathering resources externally and try to be as understanding and supportive as we possibly can to make sure that happens. And again, Mr. Penn, you're a consummate professional, and I certainly appreciate the good work that you do on behalf of this district. as I do you as Dr. Tracy and the members of the board. That's all I have to say about that until I get a chance to talk about my dear mentor when I do my teaching and learning report.
Okay, so,
Dr. Joyner.
Madam Chair,
Go
let
ahead.
me say that the equity plan that Mr. Penn presented is an example of what we're looking at if we're going to talk about equity of resources. It's as an example because we also have vulnerable populations like special education and others. He's just using that as a point of an example. If we're going to really be concerned about equitable resources, this is a way in which we're thinking of it. We know the board has to agree to say, yes, go ahead. So we're just presenting an idea of how we're looking at it. If there are questions that board members have that they further want to hear to get a clearer understanding, please email me and I will make sure that we get those questions answered. I know that may have caused, people may have had questions about that, but we have to make sure that when we give monies to school that we're concerned about the needs of the students inside of those buildings. Not all needs are the same needs. And so we have to make sure that we're supporting the schools in an equitable manner. That's what we're trying to do. Not that we're going to probably totally achieve it, but at least we're making a try. We're trying to do that because it's also a part of our strategic plan that we're trying to do that and to make this process as transparent as we can. There's nothing hidden, nothing hidden. We want to make everything clear and open to the best of our knowledge.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. Mr. Conway?
Thank you. I wanted to, Mr. Penn, thank you for this, this presentation. I wanted to drill down on the equitable resourcing as well, because there is a population that is wreaking havoc in our communities right now. It's been very close to home on several occasions. And we need to just make sure we don't forget about those individuals, the ones that are New Haven Public School System students, because an intervention in a relationship could save lives and turn kids around. I just hope that we're not just thinking about those individuals that come to school. And Dr. Tracy, I will send you a request about, what kids are coming to school and what kids are not. And I know I know we got about 4,000 or so kids coming to school right now, but I think there's a direct correlation between those who are out there and they're finding their own ways to keep themselves busy. But I just want to make sure we just keep those students in mind. They're enrolled in schools, but they're not coming to school and they're a little bit more higher risk. I understand why Hartford is probably paying $2,000 more per student than we are, because they're trying to get resources to that population. And there's a lot of students out there. And we'll be in communication, and I'll send you very specific questions about that. And Dr. Joyner and Mr. Goldston and you address some of the other questions that I was going to answer. But I just want to drill down a little deeper on that equitable resource. I guess that's area 5.1. Yep. Thank you.
And Mr. Conway, also in this SR2 grant piece, it's heavy on students who are vulnerable. That includes disengaged young people. It includes students with disabilities. It includes English learners. It includes all students who have had some loss of learning. So we're looking at thinking outside the box for how can an extended summer program, what can it look like? Different from what we normally would do, that would get our students highly engaged, not just the same old, same old. We're asked to think outside of the box, to be innovative with the thoughts and ideas that we're going to share in the proposal to the state, we're asked to do a needs assessment. And that's why we're making it a big effort. And I don't know if Ms. Hannans want to say a few more about what we're doing so there can be clarity about how we're heading into this plan. We understand, and we have always been talking, but now we have to move from talk to action of how we're supporting all our young people, all of them, but in particular, those who are most vulnerable.
Good evening to the board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll be very brief. As Dr. Tracy has said, a lot in reference to the SR2 grant, just to talk about how we have organized ourselves to do the work. For each priority, there are 4 priority areas. One focuses on academics, another on youth and family engagement. There is a 3rd priority area on social emotional well-being, and the 4th area is on remote learning, staff PD, and the digital divide. We have team leaders for each priority area. Those team leaders today in the meeting are planning committee members, which is about 75 members, as Dr. Tracy mentioned, comprised of staff as well as community members and parents, self-selected into the area that they found to be their passion. And so this conversation tonight is really interesting, very engaging, and it's all about the work that we're doing. So we look forward to your suggestions that you may have. We will report to the board and provide you with updates. Of course, it's a tight timeline from when the application is expected to arrive from the state on February 22nd till submission date. And so we are continuing to do the work. Each team has split into various subgroups focused around certain areas. And of course, in the academic area, there is a heavy focus on disengaged youth, on SPED, on L as well. And so this is out of the box. This is if you have a magic wand, what will you do? Money's not a limitation for our thoughts. We want you to step out of the box with this thinking, and that's where we're pushing everyone. We need to be innovative in our mindset. I'll give you an example of something that, for one, is near and dear to my heart. I believe every student should have the opportunity to graduate with an associate's degree. And so I would like to see us utilizing these funds in such a way to create the structures to ensure that this exists beyond September 23 when the grant ends. And so we are asking everyone to push themselves in their thinking and reimagine how we do education for all of our students. Board Member Conway, I do agree there is a direct link with the crime that we're experiencing and our kids and attendance. And so we have to talk about how we re-engage school and what does school look like? How does credit recovery look like for our students as well? Because we don't want to just send them by the side, but we need to give them something to come back to so that they can enhance their skills. So this grant provides us with that opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Hannans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hannans. Dr. Jackson?
Thank you. Dr. Tracy, I could address this to you and you just like, Ms. Hannans probably can answer, but.
You're a bit low. Could you speak up a little louder,
Okay,
Doc?
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay, so for the SR grant monies, when you guys are figuring out your plan, is there any talk about when it comes to tutoring and catching up as we come out of this, vouchers for outside enrichment, like, you know, Kumon or something like that, that parents could do, because not everyone's gonna get the full, I would say the full effect of what is going on in the schools. Some kids, you know, parents might want to do outside, pay a Yale student, you know, to come in and help, some kind of tutoring, however they choose. Will there be an opportunity for vouchers for that type of activity?
So my response to that, Dr. Jackson, the sky's the limit. Whatever the ideas are, send in those ideas. When we make our proposal to the state, inculcating all the ideas that came up on our path, the state will then say yay or nay.
So we can offer that up.
We can put, as Keisha said, Ms. Hannon said, we are thinking outside the box. We're putting it all out there. We're putting them into a proposal. The state will take a look at it, give us feedback, just like they've done with other grants, and say yay or nay. But we're putting it all there.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. Dr. Tracy, would you be able to provide the board with the attendance by school over this since we started hybrid, what we started at, if we've gone up, we've gone down? Could we have that by school?
I think we did that. I did that last week in my report, or 2 weeks ago in my report. We'll try to update it. I did remember I sent an update, a whole bunch of updates to the board.
Right. Can we have that updated?
Was in there by school, so we can update. Right now, we can update. Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Hannons, I'm going to send you that request because I would love for that to be in your paper to the state.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And please include Eve because she's the academic lead.
Thank you. Mr. Wilcox and then Mr. Golton.
I'll be brief. I do appreciate all the work that's gone into pulling together this budget. And one thing that I did want to mention regarding the equity funding, as it's been a topic in the Finance and Operations Committee meeting, I anticipate it will be a topic in the next one. As it was reported to us tonight and also in that meeting that this was possibilities, ways of doing this. I believe the base model, for instance, of doing English language learner support and neighborhood support came from Hartford, but I have also been trying to find some good metrics as to what are markers of equity. And I'm having a difficult time finding it in school systems that has any research base. I find a lot of stuff on national systems. So would be really interested to hear from folks and members of the public. I see we have more than 80 people on the call as to what should those numbers be. Should it be for the English language supports, for the neighborhood school supports, or some other types of things so that we could also add those into the mix? It's a small amount of funding, but it is, in the overall budget, but it could be very useful in an individual school as a help. So, and it's really goes a long way to going to meet some of the needs of that are in the priority area 5.1 for the strategic plan and also for our equity policy. So thanks again for all the work that's gone into this, and it's going to be interesting to see how the next several months come together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Mr. Golton.
Thank you, Madam President. I like the goal that Mrs. Hannons has set with having all of our students graduate with an associate's degree. I think that's a terrific ideal, but we have to first make sure that they graduate. That's why I like the way Dr. Jackson, the direction she's going in, and that is that to make sure that our children, because we know COVID has wreaked havoc on our community. Education certainly is part of that community, and certainly has wreaked havoc on our education system. We know that some of our kids are behind. I'm wondering, are we doing some sort of assessment or testing of our students to find out where they are? And are we going to use that as a kind of guide to where we go with this COVID money?
So I know the schools, we have to do assessment per the state. We're not getting away with that. We have to do assessment, but teachers also have a way of assessing students without even having a standardized assessment. They know where their students are because they're the ones working with them. So by working with the teachers in their focus groups, we'll get an idea of what things are as part of our needs assessment, because we have to come up with a needs assessment to inform what it is we're doing. Because we can't know if there's learning loss unless we do some kind of level of assessment, whatever that looks like. If there are no more questions, Madam President, I'm finished. this for now. I'm finished.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tracy. For the superintendent's report, I have the list of the committee members. I asked for everyone to email me with their choices on what committees they'd like to serve, and I received emails from most. I tried to accommodate all of those requests, and actually I was able to do that because there are so many committees to serve on. And I'll send this list also in an email to everyone so that you have it. Teaching and learning, a chair would be Dr. Joyner. I didn't have any other members who wanted to serve on that, except that we're all members of that committee. So that's that. Governance chair, Dr. Jackson, and Dr. Joyner as vice chair. Finance and operations will remain the same with Mr. Wilcox as chair. I would vice chair, and Mr. Conway as member. Food Service Task Force, the chair would be Mr. Conway and vice chair Matt Wilcox. Head Start Subcommittee, chair would be Mr. Wilcox and I will vice chair. School Facilities Naming Committee, Dr. Jackson has agreed to chair that committee. So thank you. And I will vice chair. Citywide School Building and Stewardship Committee, members, myself and Mr. Wilcox, that's a committee that we still have to work on because there's so many members that are needed for that committee. And then the committee to rename the school formerly known as Columbus. I have not received your appointments for this committee. Just know that I plan on moving forward with meeting dates by our next full board meeting. So please make sure to have your names to me before then so that no one misses out on the first few meetings. We do need to move forward with the process of renaming that school, and I want to make sure that the persons that you'd like to appoint to that committee are in their seats for those first few meetings. Okay. And that would be all for President's report. If there are no questions, we'll move on to finance and operations. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Finance and Operations Committee met last week as per usual, and we have, for your enjoyment tonight, 10 agreements, and I move that we approve these 10 agreements that are listed on your agenda.
So moved. Mr. Conway,
I second.
any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote on the F&O items. Mr. Goldson,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Mr. Conway,
Yes.
and I am a yes. And so finance items pass.
All right, thank
Start
you, everyone.
report, Mr. Wilcox.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for that. And just as the open invitation, if there are any comments or questions that you want to get to the committee members, we're happy to make sure that those comments and questions are brought forward at the Finance and Operations meeting. And also, in addition to an interest in potential metrics to use for an equity funding formula, we're also definitely interested if there are structural issues or things that we need to work into a calendar for this spring or this year so that we can make sure that the information is looked at and made available publicly and so on, so that we can do the work of the committee as we've been doing for the past year and so on. So just that open invitation is always there to get things to the full committee members. Thank you very much. That's Finance and Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Okay, you're up. Head Start report.
Oh, and here I am again. I'll be very brief with the Head Start report. We're going to be meeting on Thursday, February 18th at 5 p.m. And unfortunately, one of the agenda items is going to have to be the process of finding a new Head Start director and that so on. Just wanted to echo what others have said about Liz Gaffney, who's been a great Head Start director. I wish her well where she's going, and she's really left us in a pretty good place with this district. As Dr. Tracy had mentioned, and we've mentioned in previous meetings, we're not under any Head Start disciplinary things with the federal government, and in large part because of her shepherding us through that process, and not only getting us through that process, but working with all the other staff that are excellent, Pamela Augustine Jefferson, Monique Brunson, others, in making sure that we're not going to be getting in those situations again with good training and having folks work together, and also bringing in the satellite locations and making them much more of the process. So she's really got us moving in some great directions. And so the focus is going to be in the near future of how we continue that, not lose any ground. So again, thanks to Liz Gaffney for all her work. And that's the Head Start report.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Governance report, Dr. Jackson.
Okay, governance. Good evening, and I want to say I agree with Dr. Wilcox, Mr. Wilcox, concerning Liz Gaffney, a Shaw girl that ties that bond. I just want to wish her well. So very proud of my classmate. All right, so governance. Before I get to policy 5131, I just want to give you a quick update on the SRO Design Committee. They have a report to present. They will present it at the next governance meeting, and then we will bring it to the board meeting at our next board meeting. At that meeting, I'm going to present it to you at first read, because it's a heavy, it's a heavy document. There's a lot of thought that needs to go into as we bring it to the board. I would like just to bring it to us next meeting with no discussion. Just bring it for first read and keep it moving. I think it's going to be a very robust conversation when we do have that, but I want to wait until we come back with the second read once everyone has had time to really read it and digest it. Okay, so I want to give you the heads up for that for the next time. But I do have before you the second read for conduct and discipline, which is our conduct and discipline policy. And what I would like to say is that like a lot of years I've gone into this, like I said before, and one of the things that I was able to read today was a report that talks about the big school systems and how they're doing with suspensions. And they kind of rank, they rank the districts on, do they suspend a lot? Do they not suspend a lot? So it's like, they break them up in tiers. Tier 1 is low suspension rate, disproportionality. Tier 2 is consistently medium disproportionality. Tier 3, consistently high disproportionality, meaning like they're consistently suspending Black and Brown, Indigenous students disproportionately from other students. In Tier 4, consistently high suspension rates. All the other large districts, Hartford, Bridgeport, Danbury, they're all like in the lower tiers, possibly Tier 4. But over the years, as New Haven has been working with our conduct policy, we are Tier 2. And that means that we have been paying attention. We've been listening to our research. We've been listening to our students, listening to the tireless workers on this policy, on how it doesn't pay just to suspend someone. There's something behind that. How do we work? So I think it's apropos to have this come out now while we're voting on this policy. It just goes to show how much work has been done, how much foundational groundwork has been done around this, and how we all should be really honored to be able to vote this into policy. While it is not a concrete static policy, it's always going to be fluid because there's always going to be work to be done. It is a great thing to have published now to have to work with. So I want to know if there are any questions or any additions or things that people want to discuss now on this.
Mr. Conway?
I think it's a good document, and it has a lot of history to it, a lot of superintendents. The only thing I would add is that what we're going to have to talk about in the future is a post-COVID document, because it's just going to give us some more opportunities. When you talk about working outside the box, and you talk, and we got in our bag of tricks right now, hybrid and virtual school. I think that could even further enhance this policy. So I would vote on it, but I would just think about as we move post-COVID, there's some very, very, very different opportunities that we have now that we didn't have a year ago. With the new technology, with the way families are looking at remote learning, with the way families and students are looking at hybrid learning, and which the way we're looking at it. It's going to be a very different academic, social emotional world. So that's what I would add. So we're just gonna have to you said it's gonna have to need building, but that's my input. That's I read it as a very pre-COVID document, a good one, but we're moving into a post-COVID world.
Yes, and Mr. Conway, I just want to tell you thank you for that. And that was discussed. That is in discussions around the code of conduct and the code and discipline policy, conduct and discipline policy, of how we are using this in the time of COVID, and especially even after. So yes, that is well received and definitely has been on the table. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. Dr. Joyner? You're muted, Dr. Joyner.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to take this time to thank Dr. Jackson for the extraordinary effort that she's put into this. I've worked closely with her for the last, 3 years, and there are times when we get a little frustrated because we'd like to see things done fairly quickly, but just like the Gallo brothers, we won't serve a wine before it's time. I also like to note some things, and I'm sure Mr. Conway can hopefully say amen to this. One of the keys to keeping kids in school and avoid suspending them is to deal with defiance, whether it's extreme defiance and the action of physical violence against other students and staff, or whether it's a defiance in terms of not doing reasonable things in the classroom to learn. And the principals and teachers in buildings and coaches, the quality of those people and their ability to bond and attach to kids, especially the most difficult kids, is key. And I think that based on a number of systems I've worked in, New Haven has a special talent when it comes to people. Some are not in the system anymore, like Wyatt Jackson and Tim Jennings, Bob Salisbury, Tony Vitolo. They had a tremendous impact on young men. And when Mr. Conway was at Cross, he had the same impact. I would say my wife had the same impact when she was at Cross and at Hill House, Dr. Garris. And I think we have to continue to try to recruit people like that and try to train them. The other thing is that there are people in the community that we need. The late Van Spruill is an example of someone, Ronald Augustine, who worked in back in the day and who has kids that actually work in the system now. And we need to really build coalitions with people like that in order to try to reach some of these kids, especially some of the most difficult ones. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to do this, and I would urge us to vote to pass this, because the only hope for this system, for this board, for this community, for this state and this nation is for us to embrace restorative justice. Because we're in a real dark place now. And if we can't embrace the whole notion of the golden rule and giving people a second chance, but by the same token, those people have to understand that with the second chance, they can't keep doing those things, and that they have to atone for whatever transgressions. And I'm not immune from that myself. None of us is. And so I would urge the board to pass this and to embrace the notion that Mr. Conaway raised, that it's a living document, that if it were done 30 years ago, it would look differently. And if it's revisited a year from now, it will look differently. And one of the things that Ms. Conaway and I discussed last year was that with technology, we don't have to exclude kids, and we can give them the chances to get it together. But we do have to focus as much as possible on psychosocial and emotional development. And we're going to raise that again in our teaching and learning committee, as well as the notion of equity. People have to feel that they're treated fairly, and that's staff as well as students, and that they're valued. And we also have to ask more of parents. We absolutely have to ask more parents to try to work with their children to get them to understand how important and sacred school is, and how valuable an education is, and how important brotherhood and sisterhood are in this nation, especially now. So, Dr. Jackson, I commend you for all the hard work you put into this, and all the people that names go unsaid that work behind the scenes to make this possible. And let's try to get a fresh start and move in a more positive direction as we move forward over the course of this year.
Madam President,
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Go ahead.
If it's okay with you, and if Attorney Alexiata says it is in order, that this does not have to go out for a second read, since no one is really has any big problems with this. If we could vote on this today.
I would love to do that.
Yeah, I think we're okay on voting on this today. It was out for a second reading with the discussion and vote anticipated. Am I right, Attorney Alexiadis?
We're good for that.
Yeah.
It's on the agenda. You can act on it.
I would like to move that policy 5131A, conduct, discipline, and that includes our code of conduct within this, be voted on today.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion. Mr. Golton,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Mr. Conaway,
Yes.
and I am a yes. So policy 5131 passes.
Thank you so much. And just to give everyone an heads up, I will have a short presentation on this in one of the meetings, maybe next meeting, since we're not going to discuss on the SRO design, just so they can come in, one, talk about it, and then also I would like people to see the faces and hear the names that worked on this for so many years. Thank you. That ends my report.
That would be great. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Teaching and learning report, Mr. Conway and Dr. Joyner.
Well, we've actually, we have a meeting coming up, and we're going to, one of the things we're going to try to do is fill out the rest of the meetings for the year, so that, we can report that from now until December, we'll be discussing the following items. We're also trying to identify policy objectives. I'm going to ask Dr. Tracy and the staff, Ms. Velasquez, to drive that. Is there any policy that we need to work on between now and the end of the year that might be more helpful to the business of the district? And so we're going to be doing that. And again, I'd like to thank Mr. Conaway and for his support and counsel. And before I turn it over to Ms. Conaway, I just want to say a word about Eugene Vitale. I think that one of the things that we should do as a community is that we should memorialize the people that paid a great deal of their life and their fortunes in some cases to the betterment of New Haven. And I can't think of a better person than Eugene Vitale. When I came to Hill House in 1970, fresh from the South, the school had gone through a lot of riots. There was a lot of racial tension in the school between staff and students. There was violence, and there was a teacher strike. And the previous principal had struggled with trying to maintain order and justice in the school. And Eugene Vitale was appointed as principal. And I have never met anyone who worked as hard and as fair to try to make everybody in the school feel like they counted, and to also call out people who were not doing right by the kids. He actually fired a counselor who had been doing it for years, telling kids that they shouldn't go to college, that they asked them, did they have babies? These are real situations. Anybody who went to house in 1970 or 1969 through 74 knows the particular person I'm talking about. And so he really mobilized the school. He worked in the community, and I was very fortunate. He chose me as a mentee, and I owe all of my career and professional expertise to Eugene Vitale, and of course, Sal Verderam, Emma Ruff, and those people that were at Hill House in the old days. Unfortunately, he passed away from COVID. It's a sad time for me, and I think it's a sad time for the kids that attended Hill House that he personally helped. He was a good steward, and he will be missed. And you talk about Italian heritage. We don't have to look too far beyond New Haven to identify those people like Eugene Vitale, Red Verderam, Mike Mangillo, who's alive and well, Gerald Tarazi, Rosa DeLauro, her mother. We have heroes within our midst. And I would hope that the naming committee would take that into consideration when they start to look at naming places and buildings in our schools. And so I like to ask everybody to just take a moment of silence in memory of Eugene Vitale. Thank you. Mr. Conway?
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Yes, I remember Eugene. He was a very good person. The only thing that I want to just add, Dr. Joyner, is we did say that we would do a panel of assistant principals, and if that's possible in teaching and learning, I think that would complete our rotation until we, start this next wave of whatever it is that we're going to be doing. And I think teaching and learning has been very good. Culture has been good. Leadership has been good, and the learning has been good. So, and you said it all. So, and President Rivera said that we're all on this committee, so I'll continue to be joining that work.
Thank you, Ms. Conway. And actually, Ms. Velasquez has indicated that is foremost on the agenda, and it's likely that we'll have the APs in March, because there's some stuff that has come up now around textbook adoption or whatever, but they'll be there in March. And and be able to talk about life in the school from the perspective of an assistant principal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner and Mr. Conway. Food Service Task Group, Mr. Conway.
We have a meeting on Wednesday, and I did report out at the last board meeting that we continue to talk about life-threatening food allergies. We continue to talk about feeding the students and families. You know, I like the policy that the Board of Education has. If you're 18 years of age and you need food, they're going to try to get it to us. There was a question about asked if families or students test positive for COVID, do they still get fed? And that's absolute yes. We make every effort to have somebody get food to them. So that's where we're at with that. We're still dealing with that, with the budget deficit, about a $2 million deficit, and that comes up in finance and operations and stuff. But other than that, the culture on that committee is work oriented, it's respectful, and it's growing, and it's an interesting committee, you know, and a very important committee, and I'm happy to continue to work with that. So I'll give another update at the next board meeting after our 210 food task service meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. Dr. Tracy?
As we're talking about food and food insecurities, Mr. Conway, as you know, the past couple of days we've had a number of remote days, and the inability to distribute food to our families because of the weather condition. And tomorrow is going to be also one of those days. Tomorrow is really one of those funny days where it seemed like the snow is going to start about 5 through 8, and then throughout the day, and then you know what the parking lot is, and all these different pieces where the food service people cannot get to their workstations, and the slippery condition of the road. So, you know, we have great concerns when we have to close down for snow about how do we get our families fed, because I'm pretty sure there are family members out there who I'm very concerned about that during the past couple of days were not able to get the food, the resources that we have for them. I don't know what the answer is, because we have to also make sure that the food service workers are safe, you know, and we know that many of our roads were not cleaned up on time, especially where they, you know, in the neighborhood where they live, or so it was hard for many of them to get out to service our kids. So I just want to put that out there, that if you know of any way, I wish I had a helicopter or something, or a drone or something. Yeah, but I'm really truly concerned about that, because tomorrow is looking like another remote day.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy.
Let's put
Mr. Conway.
Yeah, we'll put that down as another challenge, Dr. Tracy. We might have to, you know, get some snowmobiles or something. I don't know. We'll work on it. We got to think outside. Miss Hannah said we got to think outside the box. You know. Equity. We've had 2 meetings. Our last meeting was January 27th. We are looking at, we set up 2 committees, a job description committee, and we have another, and we're looking at information from surrounding towns. We meet the last Wednesday of the month, and we're trying to figure this out. One of the things that we didn't do, Dr. Tracy, that you did, you know, you mentioned, we did not have part-timers on our equity agenda, and I heard you say you wanted us to look at that. So we'll look at the part-timers as well, because I do agree with Mr. Goldston that, you know, that it's just not equal there. And we'll look at that. So, you know, 2 committees, we'll look at part-timers, we'll look at job descriptions, information from surrounding towns, and try to come up with some recommendations to make this equal for specifically those paraprofessionals. Again, we meet the last Wednesday of every month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. I don't have a report for Facilities Naming Committee other than just to remind you again to email me the names of the persons that you'd like on the naming committee for the school formerly known as Columbus, so that we can get going with those meetings. In terms of citywide school building, our next meeting is Thursday, February 11th at 4:30 p.m. And there are no other items to report, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I have a quick question.
Dr. Jackson?
Um,
I was trying to find you on my screen.
I don't know if Dr. Tracy could answer this. Any idea of what kind of monies they're talking about with all this new stuff with focusing on opening up schools that I've been hearing about in the news? Is that just ideas are throwing around right now, or is that new monies that are supposed to be coming out, like for buildings and all that stuff? Have you heard anything about that?
You're muted, Dr. Tracy.
Is that just something they're talking about, or is that something that's happening? I don't know if this.
You mean like from the Biden administration and stuff like that?
Yeah, has that?
There are talks about putting more money, funding into schools. We do not yet know what that looks like, what that will be like.
Okay.
We're not sure, but I think states are up to getting more funding through the Biden administration. We do not know what that will be like yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy.
We-
Mayor Elicker?
We fully welcome any funding from the federal government, but have no info on that. I wish we did.
Agreed.
But I do know that remember, New Haven has gone all the way out by upgrading our ventilation systems and stuff in our schools. Many school systems did not do that or did not have the resources to do that. And so and this is nationwide, they're pushing for all systems to upgrade their ventilation system during this COVID time. So some of those monies I heard they're talking about will be going towards that to ensure that there's safe openings of schools for the students.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tracy. And
I move that this meeting is adjourned.
I second.
okay, Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Mr. Goldson,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Conway,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Good night and thank you, everyone.
Hasta luego.
Thank you.